Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. An artist drew a picture of the Green Dragon Tavern. Below it he wrote these words: "Where we met to plan the consignment of a few shiploads of tea, December the 16th, 1773. In the upper left-hand corner of this drawing, he put a square and compass. To this day, no one knows who planned the Boston Tea Party." The building had been purchased by St. Andrew's Lodge in 1764. There was a square and compass over the front door, and a copper dragon that had turned green through the weather. It was a community centre. Downstairs was the tavern. Upstairs was the St. Andrew's Lodge and Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, the ancients. It was the largest place for meetings in the north-east end of Boston. Historians have called it the headquarters of the American Revolution. Here, the Boston Committee of Correspondence was formed after a few initial meetings at Brother Joseph Warren's house a few doors away. Here, the Sons of Liberty held secret sessions. They wore a jewel around their neck and were known to have a separate language for recognition. The jewel had a picture of the Liberty Tree on it. The North End Caucus formed the guard here that publicly guarded the tea ships, so no tea could be unloaded. Brother Edward Proctor of St. Andrew's Lodge was known to be the leader of this guard. Brother Paul Revere served with this guard. Later, Brother Paul Revere served in another guard called the Select Men, who walked the streets of Boston 2 by 2 and observed the movements of British troops before he went off on his famous ride to Lexington. The Select Men Guard met at the Green Dragon Tavern and took an oath of secrecy over a Bible. Dr. Joseph Warren, a 33-year-old physician, is the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts that meets upstairs. Paul Revere is the Senior Grand Deacon. Both are past masters of the St. Andrew's Lodge. They are close friends and had come to the St. Andrew's Lodge in the same year. It is Joseph Warren who sends Paul Revere to Lexington with a coded message for Brother John Hancock, who was also of St. Andrew's Lodge. Warren and Revere met at the Green Dragon Tavern with the North End Caucus that sang the Rally Mohawks song. The song tells us that Warren and Revere are there, but no one ever tells us who the chiefs are, and we'll never know who the Mohawks are. "Rally, Mohawks, bring out your axes, and tell King George we'll pay no taxes on his foreign tea. His threats are in vain, and vain to think, to force our girls and wives to drink his vile bohea. Then rally, boys, and hasten on, to meet our chiefs at the Green Dragon. Our Warren's here, and bold Revere, with hands to do and words to cheer for liberty and laws. Our country's braves and firm defenders shall ne'er be left by true North Enders, fighting freedom's cause. Then rally, boys, and hasten on to meet our chiefs at the Green Dragon." The vile bohea is another name for the tea of the East India Company. It has been rotting in their warehouses in England. This is cheap tea, and the company needs to get rid of it. The British Parliament has given the East India Tea Company a monopoly on tea. The colonies are not supposed to buy any other tea. Parliament has kept a tax on tea just to prove that they have the power to tax. And taxation without representation, along with a tea monopoly, is tyranny. On the night of the Boston Tea Party, there were men who called themselves Mohawks and put lampblack and paint on their faces as a disguise. Some of these Mohawks met at the Green Dragon Tavern. Some met in homes. Some wrapped themselves in blankets and sat in the balcony of the old South Meeting House, mixing with the crowd. Some came from the Eads printing office. 2,000 people stand on Griffin's Wharf and watch the Boston Tea Party. The crowd is silent as 60 men dump 90,000 pounds of tea into the salt water. There are secret signs and countersigns for recognition. One Mohawk says, "Ugh." A second raises his hatchet and says, "Me, you know." The first then counters by raising his hatchet and giving another, "Ugh." In all that crowd, no one wanted to identify a Mohawk. One man said he would be a witness, provided the trial would be 3,000 miles away in London. There never was a trial. Governor Hutchinson wouldn't have a trial in Boston because he thought the jury would turn out to be Mohawks or their sympathizers. The Mohawks remain one of the mysteries of the American Revolution. Let's look at the events that lead up to the evening of the December 16th Tea Party to see if they shed a bit of light. October 23rd. Brother Warren and Brother Revere meet at the Green Dragon Tavern to publish the resolution of the North End Caucus, to oppose the vending of any tea sent by the East India Company with our lives and fortunes. November the 3rd. Brother William Molyneux, a member of St Andrew's Lodge, acts as spokesman for the Sons of Liberty. A notice was placed on the Liberty Tree that the consignees of the tea were to report and publicly resign their commissions as tea agents for the East India Company. Ignore this at your peril. Consignees do not appear. A crowd of 300 people follow Brother Molyneux and Brother Warren to the customs house to confront the consignees. The crowd tears the doors off the hinges, and Brother Molyneux confronts the consignees. Will they resign as consignees so the tea ships can turn around and carry the tea back to England? No, the consignees would not resign. In fact, they then moved to Fort William under military protection. In New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston, the consignees for the tea had resigned their commissions at the request of the Sons of Liberty. Those tea ships had sailed back to England with the tea. There were no consignees to pay the tax and sign for the tea. But not in Boston. Governor Hutchinson and his family were in the tea business. 2 of Governor Hutchinson's sons and a son-in-law were consignees. The Tea Act stated that if the tea was not sold by December the 17th, it could be seized by the custom house and sold for non-payment of duties. Once the tea was in the governor's hands, he could dispose of it secretly to local merchants. No, the consignees would not resign. Steps had to be taken before December the 17th. November the 5th. The Town Committee of Selectmen try another approach to the governor and the consignees. These selectmen are leading tradesmen in Boston. They are led by Brother John Hancock, a member of the St Andrew's Lodge. He is the richest man in New England. He is the colonel of the governor's cadet corps. He has been given special orders by the governor to maintain order around the tea ships. Also on the Committee of Selectmen is Brother John Rowe. He is the Grand Master of the St. John's Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, the Moderns. The St. John's Lodge meets upstairs over the Bunch of Grapes Tavern, and most of the members are Tory in their sympathy. Brother Rowe is the owner of one of the tea ships, the Eleanor. He has promised to use his influence with the governor to return the tea ships and the tea to England. It is a matter of trade with the selectmen, and they use a different appeal. The select men meet to wait on the consignees and request them, from a regard of their own character and the peace and good order of this town and providence, immediately to resign their appointment. No, the consignees still would not resign. History might have been different if the governor of Massachusetts had not been in the tea trade. November the 29th. The tea ship Dartmouth arrives in Boston. The The Committee of Correspondence, led by Brother Joseph Warren, distributes handbills calling for a mass town meeting to return the tea whence it came. The detestable tea shipped for this port by the East India Company is now arrived in this harbour. The hour of destruction on manly opposition to the machinations of tyranny stares you in the face. 5,000 people gather and vote to return the tea ship. Brother John Hancock acts as moderator for the town meetings. Brother Paul Revere starts his work as a guard on the tea ship to see that the tea is not unloaded. November the 30th. Records of the St. Andrew's Lodge indicate that the lodge is adjourned this night on account of few brethren present. Note: consignees of tea took up the brethren's time. December the 15th. Time is running out. Colonel John Hancock goes to the tea ships to review the Governor's Cadet Corps. Both he and Brother Warren had been orators at the commemoration of those who had died in the Boston Massacre. The consignees were blaming the North End Caucus Guard because they would not let the consignees unload the tea. The caucus had been guarding the tea at gunpoint and holding secret sessions at the Green Dragon Tavern. The consignees were blamed by both Tory and Patriot because they would not withdraw and let the tea be returned to England. Brother Warren goes to the custom house with Francis Roch, the owner of the tea ship, Dartmouth. All exits to the harbour are blocked. By law, the customs official cannot release the ship unless the consignees unload the tea and pay the tax. On December 17, the customs officials are to seize the tea according to the law. Brother Warren visits Brother Rowe, the owner of the tea ship Eleanor. These two Grand Masters hold a unique title in American history for the ancients and moderns. Each were called the Grand Master of the continent of America. They meet in a concern for his ship and cargo. Another appeal must be made to the Governor. December the 16th. The evening of the famous tea party. The records of the St. Andrew's Lodge show that only 5 members were present. A note says, "Lodge closed on account of few members present." The Committee of Correspondence with Brother Warren calls for a mass town meeting. 7,000 people meet in and around the Old South Meeting House. It is the largest crowd that has ever assembled in Boston. They wait to hear a message from Governor Hutchinson. Will he return the tea to England? 7 miles away at Milton, the Governor meets with Francis Roch, the owner of the Dartmouth. Brother John Hancock and Brother John Rowe help in the appeal to the Governor to return the tea. The Governor would not let the ships leave with the tea. It would be contrary to the customs law. Instead, he would give the Dartmouth military escort to Castle Island and Fort Williams. There, his sons would unload the tea and pay the tax. The owner of the Dartmouth did not want to move his ship under those circumstances involving a 60-gun military warship escort. The Dartmouth owner returns to the crowded Old South Meeting Hall with the news. He is asked 2 questions. Will he take the Dartmouth to England with the tea? No, it would mean his ruin. Would he unload the tea at the wharf? No, he was not authorized to unload it. The meeting ended, and it was then that the Mohawks unloaded a consignment of tea at Griffin's Wharf. The Governor's Cadet Corps stood far back from the crowd on the wharf. The crews of the tea ships went below and gave no assistance. Some of them even helped unload the tea. The crowd observed a silence. No damage was done to the ships. No tea was kept by an individual. The whole tea party was in range of a 60-gun warship. the British Admiral watched from the upstairs windows of a house nearby. Afterwards, the Mohawks marched by under his window. The Admiral opened the window and shouted, "Tomorrow you'll have to pay the piper." Brother Paul Revere mounts his horse and carries the news to New York. With that news, a tea ship at New York turns around and sails back to England with the tea. The news is spread by the Committee of Correspondence. There are over 100 of these committees in Massachusetts alone. From the time of the Boston Tea Party, the East India Company sold no more tea in America. The aftermath. Brother John Rowe calls the dumping of the tea a disastrous affair in his diary. "I can truly say I know nothing of the matter, nor who were concerned with it. This might, I believe, have been prevented. I am sincerely sorry for the event." Brother Rowe was a loyalist, and he remained a loyalist. The English Attorney General placed Joseph Warren's name at the top of a list of 5. The charge would have been treason for the Boston Tea Party. There was a lack of evidence, and the minister never pressed charges. This was not the first time that Governor Hutchinson and his sons had taken a loss in their tea trading. Just 3 years before, Brother William Molyneux and Brother James Otis of St. John's Lodge led a crowd of 1,000 patriots from Faneuil Hall to confront the Hutchinsons. That time there was a non-importation agreement in Boston. It was about to run out. His sons had been importing tea and hiding it, waiting to make a profit. His sons surrendered the tea and the money for the tea they had already sold. The Hutchinsons didn't forget it. Nor did the Sons of Liberty. After the Tea Party, Governor Hutchinson was withdrawn to London for consultation. The King and Ministry sent in General Gage as a new military governor and gave him full discretion to find evidence for a trial of those responsible for the Boston Tea Party. There was no trial in Boston. Benjamin Franklin, a Grand Master of Pennsylvania, was in London at the time. He called the Boston Tea Party an act of violent injustice. A group of London merchants wanted to pay twice the value of the tea to keep the trade open. Franklin offered to pay for the tea himself. Though the mischief was an act of persons unknown, yet as probably they cannot be found, or brought to answer for it. There seems to be some reasonable claim on the society at large in which it happened. But no one ever paid for the tea, because Parliament closed down the port of Boston, cut off the trade, and sent in the troops. Many years later, Sir Winston Churchill, Prime Minister, historian and Freemason, commented on the Act of Parliament that had given the East India Company a monopoly on tea. Brother Churchill called it a stupid blunder. Americans have been drinking coffee ever since. The English said that the reason the Americans had lost their taste for tea was that they had a peculiar way of mixing it in the salt water. It started with the Green Dragon Tavern. If a man ordered tea, he was a Tory. If he ordered coffee, he was a patriot. Is it not strange that no one could be found to identify the Mohawks? It was the same the year before in Rhode Island. Some patriots, dressed as Indians, attacked the Gaspee in longboats. The British claimed that Brother Abraham Whipple of St. John's Lodge No. 1 in Providence was the leader. They promised to hang him. Brother Whipple said they would have to catch him first. George Washington, at age 22, was asked why he became a Mason. He said it was because he found them to be leaders in the community. Faneuil Hall and the Old South Meeting House still stand in Boston. The Green Dragon Tavern burned down years ago. The heritage lives on in a picture made in 1773. The artist had the fortitude to sign his name to the words, "Where we met to plan the consignment of a few shiploads of tea, December the 16th, 1773.
The principles of Freemasonry, its emphasis on morality, fraternity, and self-improvement, were the philosophical ideals of Enlightenment thinkers like Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin, born in 1706 in Boston, is remembered as a man of boundless energy, ingenuity, and vision. His achievements include the invention of the lightning rod, the establishment of America's first subscription library, the creation of the first volunteer fire company, and, of course, his critical role as one of the architects of the United States. Beyond his public and scientific endeavors, Franklin was also a dedicated Freemason, a fraternity whose values resonated profoundly with his personal philosophy. His Masonic career spanned more than 6 decades, during which he rose to high office in both American and European lodges. Freemasonry, with its emphasis on morality, equality, self-improvement, and service, provided Franklin with a framework that guided much of his work and shaped his worldview.
The fundamental principles of Freemasonry are those of brotherly love, relief, and truth, which Franklin embraced in both his private and public life.
The 18th century, often referred to as the Age of Enlightenment, was a time of great intellectual ferment. It was an era that sought to prioritize reason, scientific inquiry, and the betterment of humanity.
The Enlightenment was a period where the ideals of liberty, reason, and fraternity flourished, coinciding with the expansion of Freemasonry as an institution of moral and intellectual development.
Freemasonry, which emerged as a prominent force during this period, embodied many of these ideals. It became a haven for men of intellect and character, offering a forum for philosophical discourse, moral instruction, and civic engagement. For Franklin, whose life was already marked by an insatiable curiosity and a passion for learning, Freemasonry was a natural fit. It provided not only camaraderie and inspiration, but also a means to translate lofty ideals into practical action. To understand the profound influence of Freemasonry on Benjamin Franklin's life, we must first examine the circumstances of his early years and the events that led to his initiation into the craft. Born on January 17th, 1706 in Boston, Massachusetts, Franklin was the 15th of 17 children in a modest family of candle and soap makers. Franklin's formal education was brief. He attended school for only 2 years before financial constraints forced him to leave. Despite this, he became a voracious reader and self-taught intellectual, developing an appreciation for literature, science, and philosophy. At the age of 12, he was apprenticed to his older brother, James Franklin, a printer and publisher. It was in this role that Franklin first demonstrated his exceptional talents as a writer and thinker. Through his contributions to the New England Courant, a newspaper run by his brother, Franklin began to develop the sharp wit and incisive commentary that would characterize his later works. At the age of 17, Franklin left Boston and eventually settled in Philadelphia, where he established himself as a printer and publisher. It was during this period, sometime in 1730 or 1731, that Franklin was initiated into Freemasonry at St. John's Lodge in Philadelphia. Although the exact date of his initiation remains uncertain, it is widely believed to have occurred in February of one of those years. This marked the beginning of a lifelong association with the craft, one that would profoundly influence his personal philosophy and public endeavors. Interestingly, Franklin's relationship with Freemasonry prior to his initiation was somewhat unconventional. In his publication, the Pennsylvania Gazette, he had made light-hearted jokes about the fraternity, a move that some historians interpret as a strategic attempt to garner the attention and favor of the local lodge.
Through his writings in the Pennsylvania Gazette, Franklin helped demystify Freemasonry and align it with the principles of education and enlightenment.
By doing so, Franklin may have sought to establish himself as a figure of note within Philadelphia's social and intellectual circles before formally applying for membership. Once initiated, however, Franklin's tone toward Freemasonry shifted dramatically. He began to publish numerous positive articles about the fraternity, extolling its virtues and emphasizing its commitment to moral and social improvement.
In my youth, I could see that Masonry had much to offer, both morally and intellectually, a true brotherhood that transcended all worldly distinctions.
Franklin's initiation into Freemasonry signified his entry into a network of individuals dedicated to ethical development and civic responsibility.
St. John's Lodge, the lodge into which Franklin was initiated, was one of the earliest Masonic lodges in America. It was part of a broader movement during the early 18th century that saw Freemasonry spreading from Europe to the American colonies. Freemasonry provided its members with a unique combination of intellectual fellowship, moral instruction, and social networking opportunities, making it particularly appealing to ambitious and intellectually curious individuals like Franklin. The values of Freemasonry, brotherhood, charity, equality, and the pursuit of moral and intellectual improvement, resonated deeply with Franklin's own beliefs. Throughout his life, he exemplified the Masonic ideal of self-improvement, striving to better himself and his community through education, innovation, and public service. Freemasonry provided him with a framework within which he could channel his ambitions and intellect toward the betterment of society, a theme that would recur throughout his career. Benjamin Franklin's rise within the ranks of Freemasonry reflected both his dedication to the craft and his remarkable talents for leadership and organization. In an era when advancement within Masonic lodges often required years of service and recognition, Franklin quickly distinguished himself as a figure of exceptional ability and commitment.
Franklin's rapid rise within Masonic ranks demonstrates his natural aptitude for leadership and his alignment with the fraternity's core principles of moral and social progress.
Within a year of his initiation into St. John's Lodge in 1730 or 1731, Franklin had already taken on significant responsibilities. He was appointed to the committee tasked with drafting the bylaws of the lodge, a key role that demonstrated both his understanding of Masonic principles and his aptitude for governance. This early appointment marked the beginning of his active participation in the administrative and organizational aspects of the fraternity, which would become a hallmark of his Masonic career. In 1732, Franklin was elected junior warden of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. This was a significant achievement, as it placed him in a position of authority within the larger Masonic structure of the region. The Provincial Grand Lodge, subordinate to the Grand Lodge of England, was responsible for overseeing the activities of local lodges in Pennsylvania, and Franklin's appointment to this role signaled his growing prominence within the fraternity.
Franklin's election as junior warden reflected not only his commitment but also his recognition as a leader within the Masonic community.
Franklin's rapid ascent continued in 1734, when he was appointed Grand Master of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. This appointment was particularly noteworthy given Franklin's relatively short tenure as a Mason at that point. His selection as Grand Master reflects the high regard in which he was held by his fellow Masons, who recognized his leadership skills, intellectual acumen, and dedication to the principles of Freemasonry. As Grand Master, Franklin played a pivotal role in promoting the growth and development of the fraternity in Pennsylvania, solidifying its place as a cornerstone of civic and social life in the colony.
The brethren of this lodge have chosen me to lead, not because of my seniority, but because of my commitment to the principles we cherish.
In addition to his role as Grand Master, Franklin served as Secretary of St. John's Lodge from 1735 to 1738. This position required meticulous record-keeping and correspondence, skills that Franklin had honed through his work as a printer and publisher. One of Franklin's most significant accomplishments during this period was his publication of the Constitutions of the Freemasons in 1734, a reprint of James Anderson's Constitutions. This was the first Masonic book ever printed in America, and it played a crucial role in spreading Masonic ideas and principles throughout the colonies.
Freemasonry being a craft of enlightenment, I deemed it essential to provide American brethren with the very constitution that guided our brethren in Europe.
By printing the Constitutions, Franklin solidified Freemasonry's intellectual presence in the colonies and demonstrated its compatibility with Enlightenment ideals.
Benjamin Franklin's contributions to Masonic literature stand as some of the most enduring aspects of his involvement in the craft. As a skilled printer, writer, and editor, Franklin understood the power of the written word to disseminate ideas and foster a shared sense of identity among Freemasons. Through his publications, Franklin not only provided practical resources for the fraternity, but also helped to articulate and promote its values, solidifying its place in the cultural and intellectual life of colonial America. One of Franklin's most significant contributions to Freemasonry was his publication of the Constitutions of the Freemasons in 1734. This work was a reprint of James Anderson's Constitutions, originally published in England in 1723, and it holds the distinction of being the first Masonic book ever printed in America. Anderson's Constitutions included a history of Freemasonry, as well as its rules, regulations, and charges. By reprinting this seminal text, Franklin made the principles of Freemasonry accessible to a wider audience and provided American Masons with a foundational document that connected them to the broader Masonic tradition. The significance of this publication cannot be overstated. At a time when Freemasonry was still relatively new in the American colonies, the Constitutions of the Freemasons served as both a practical guide and a symbol of the fraternity's legitimacy and continuity with its European roots. Franklin's decision to undertake this project reflected his belief in the importance of Freemasonry as a unifying force that could foster moral and intellectual growth. The book's impact was profound, helping to standardize Masonic practices across the colonies and providing a shared reference point for lodges. Franklin's role as a publisher also allowed him to use his newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, to promote Masonic ideals. Following his initiation into Freemasonry, Franklin's tone in the Gazette shifted markedly. He began publishing articles that praised the fraternity and highlighted its emphasis on charity, brotherhood, and self-improvement.
Let us consider that we are all parts of one great whole, and let the good of the people be the ultimate law.
These writings not only enhanced the public image of Freemasonry, but also underscored Franklin's personal commitment to its principles. Through his newspaper, Franklin became one of the first American advocates of Freemasonry, helping to demystify the fraternity and emphasize its contributions to society. In addition to his direct publications, Franklin's involvement in the craft influenced his broader intellectual endeavors. His writing often reflected Masonic values, such as the pursuit of truth, the importance of ethical conduct, and the need for mutual support among individuals. For example, Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac, one of his most famous works, contained numerous aphorisms and proverbs that align with Masonic teachings, including exhortations to industry, humility, and the betterment of society. While not explicitly Masonic, these writings reveal how deeply the principles of the craft were embedded in Franklin's worldview. Franklin's efforts to promote Masonic literature and ideals extended beyond his work as a printer. He also supported the creation of Masonic infrastructure in the colonies, including the construction of the first Masonic building in America in Philadelphia.
The construction of Masonic buildings during Franklin's time symbolized the fraternity's growing influence in civic life and its role in fostering community.
As a member of the committee overseeing this project, Franklin helped ensure that Freemasonry would have a physical space in which to flourish, further solidifying its presence in colonial society. Through his publications and related endeavors, Franklin demonstrated how Freemasonry could serve as both a personal philosophy and a public institution. His contributions to Masonic literature were not merely technical achievements, but also acts of cultural leadership that shaped the identity of Freemasonry in America. By providing Masons with the tools and texts they needed to thrive, Franklin laid the groundwork for the fraternity's expansion and enduring influence. Benjamin Franklin's public life demonstrated the alignment between Masonic principles and civic engagement. As a statesman, diplomat, inventor, and founder of key institutions, Franklin applied the values of Freemasonry: brotherhood, equality, self-improvement, and service to others across every facet of his career. His Masonic affiliations were not merely a private commitment, but a guiding philosophy that shaped his public actions, leaving an indelible mark on American society and the world. One of Franklin's most notable contributions to public life was his role in improving the civic infrastructure of Philadelphia. As a committed Freemason, Franklin believed in the importance of creating institutions that would serve the common good. Among his many achievements, he established the first subscription library in America, the Library Company of Philadelphia, which provided access to books and knowledge for all, not just the wealthy. This effort mirrored Masonic ideals of intellectual improvement and the pursuit of enlightenment. In 1736, Franklin founded the Union Fire Company, the first volunteer fire department in Philadelphia. This initiative demonstrated his belief in the Masonic principle of mutual aid, where individuals work together to protect and support their community. Similarly, his involvement in creating the American Philosophical Society in 1743 reflected Freemasonry's emphasis on scientific inquiry and the advancement of knowledge for the betterment of humanity. Franklin's Masonic values also extended to the physical spaces of the fraternity. He served on the committee for the construction of the first Masonic building in America, located in Philadelphia. According to Masonic tradition, Franklin and his fellow Masons also laid the cornerstone for the State House in Philadelphia, later known as Independence Hall, symbolically connecting the founding of the United States with the principles of Freemasonry.
The cornerstone we lay today is not just a foundation of stone, but of principles: liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Franklin's diplomatic career is perhaps the most striking example of how his Masonic values informed his public life. Appointed as a representative of the American colonies to Europe, Franklin used his Masonic connections to foster goodwill and build alliances, particularly in France, where Freemasonry was an influential social and intellectual network.
Masonry has opened the doors to friendships and alliances that serve the greater good, transcending national boundaries.
In 1777, Franklin joined the prestigious Lodge of the Nine Sisters, Loge des Neuf Sœurs, in Paris, a lodge known for its association with prominent intellectuals and supporters of the American Revolution. While in France, Franklin's Masonic affiliations facilitated his diplomatic efforts to secure French support for the American cause. His membership in the Lodge of the Nine Sisters allowed him to cultivate relationships with influential figures, including philosophers, scientists, and statesmen. Franklin's role in assisting the initiation of Voltaire into the Lodge in 1778 further solidified his reputation as a respected member of the fraternity and as a bridge between American and European intellectual traditions.
Voltaire's initiation, facilitated by Franklin, represented a convergence of Enlightenment thought and Masonic ideals.
Franklin's diplomatic success in France owed much to the Masonic principle of brotherhood. By emphasizing shared values and mutual respect, Franklin was able to build trust and cooperation between France and the fledgling United States. His efforts culminated in the Treaty of Alliance in 1778, which secured French military and financial support for the American Revolution. This alliance was instrumental in the eventual victory of the American colonies and the establishment of the United States as an independent nation. As one of the founding fathers, Franklin played a central role in the creation of the United States, and his Masonic principles are evident in the founding documents and institutions of the nation. The Declaration of Independence, which Franklin helped to draft, reflects Masonic ideals of liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. The emphasis on individual rights and collective responsibility in the U.S. Constitution also aligns with Masonic teachings on the dignity of the individual and the importance of working together for the common good. Freemasonry's emphasis on morality and ethical conduct was a consistent theme in Franklin's political career. He famously wrote to his mother in 1738, reassuring her that Freemasons have no principles or practices that are inconsistent with religion and good manners. This statement highlights his belief in the compatibility of Masonic values with a virtuous and upright life. Franklin's commitment to these values was evident not only in his personal conduct, but also in his efforts to promote justice, education, and public welfare throughout his career. In his public life, Franklin exemplified the Masonic ideal of the moral architect, a person who seeks to build a better society through service, wisdom, and ethical conduct. His work as a diplomat, inventor, and statesman was deeply rooted in the principles he embraced as a Freemason. Whether founding institutions, forging international alliances, or contributing to the birth of a nation, Franklin consistently demonstrated a commitment to the betterment of humanity. Benjamin Franklin's life and career were deeply intertwined with the principles of Freemasonry, reflecting its emphasis on self-improvement, intellectual curiosity, and service to others. These Masonic values did not simply complement Franklin's personal philosophy. They were central to it, shaping his actions and guiding his decisions throughout his life. By examining how Franklin's beliefs aligned with Masonic ideals, we can better understand the profound influence of the craft on his enduring legacy. Freemasonry's foundational principle of self-improvement resonated strongly with Franklin, who dedicated his life to personal growth and intellectual advancement. As a young man, Franklin developed his famous 13 virtues, a system of moral discipline that bears striking similarities to Masonic teachings. These virtues, such as temperance, humility, and industry, aligned closely with the moral and ethical framework of the craft.
My moral perfection project was deeply influenced by the lessons learned in Masonry, a continual striving toward personal betterment.
Franklin's 13 virtues parallel the moral teachings of Freemasonry, emphasizing discipline, integrity, and the pursuit of perfection.
Franklin's commitment to lifelong learning was evident in his prolific contributions to science, literature, and philosophy. His inventions, such as the lightning rod and bifocal glasses, were not merely technical innovations, but also reflections of his desire to use knowledge for the betterment of society. Similarly, his founding of the Library Company of Philadelphia and the American Philosophical Society showcased his dedication to spreading knowledge and fostering intellectual growth, a pursuit that mirrors Freemasonry's emphasis on the Enlightenment ideals of reason and education. Freemasonry also emphasizes the importance of reflection and self-examination, values that Franklin embraced wholeheartedly. In his autobiography, Franklin described how he kept a daily journal to track his progress in living according to his virtues. This habit of introspection and self-assessment was a hallmark of his character, and a practice deeply rooted in Masonic traditions. One of the central tenets of Freemasonry is the principle of universal brotherhood, the idea that all men, regardless of social or economic status, are equals within the lodge. Franklin lived this ideal throughout his life, building relationships with individuals from all walks of life and treating them with respect and dignity. His Masonic membership provided him with a network of like-minded individuals who shared his commitment to equality and fraternity. Franklin's dedication to the principle of brotherhood extended beyond the confines of the lodge. As a diplomat, he worked tirelessly to foster cooperation and mutual understanding between nations, particularly during his time in France. His ability to build bridges between disparate groups, whether Masonic brethren, political allies, or international partners, actualized his belief in the power of unity and collaboration. Franklin's advocacy for equality was also evident in his later years, when he became an outspoken critic of slavery. As president of the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery, he worked to advance the cause of liberty and justice, embodying the Masonic commitment to the dignity and worth of every individual.
All men are created equal in the eyes of their Creator, and Masonry teaches us that all should be treated as brethren.
Franklin's late-life activism against slavery reflected his embrace of Freemasonry's ideals of universal brotherhood and human dignity.
Another cornerstone of Freemasonry is the principle of service to humanity, which Franklin exemplified in every aspect of his public life. From his contributions to civic infrastructure, such as founding fire companies and public hospitals, to his efforts to improve education and scientific understanding, Franklin consistently sought to use his talents for the benefit of others. Franklin's role in the founding of the United States was perhaps his most significant act of service. As a founding father, he helped draft the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, documents that reflect the Masonic ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. His belief in the power of collective action and his vision for a just and equitable society were rooted in the principles he embraced as a Freemason. Freemasonry's use of symbols to convey moral and philosophical teachings found a natural affinity in Franklin's scientific and intellectual pursuits. The square and compasses, symbols of morality and guidance, reflected Franklin's methodical and principled approach to life. His writings often incorporated allegories and metaphors, a technique inspired by the symbolic language of Freemasonry. Moreover, Franklin's dedication to balance and harmony in all things resonated with Masonic ideals. Whether in his experiments with electricity, his political negotiations, or his personal relationships, Franklin sought to create order and coherence. Franklin's contemporaries recognized him as an exemplar of Masonic values. Near the end of his life, he was honored by his Pennsylvania brethren as an illustrious brother of distinguished merit, a title that acknowledged his extraordinary contributions to the craft and society. Count Mirabeau, the French revolutionary leader, eulogized Franklin as a philosopher and statesman who had advanced the cause of liberty and enlightenment, reflecting the highest ideals of Freemasonry. Franklin's legacy as a Freemason is not defined by his titles or offices, but by the way he lived his life, perfectly plumb, square, and level in his dealings with others. He embodied the virtues of humility, charity, and wisdom, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire Masons and non-Masons alike. Benjamin Franklin's legacy as a Freemason is as profound and enduring as his contributions to science, diplomacy, and the founding of the United States. His 6-decade association with Freemasonry not only elevated the fraternity in America and Europe, but also demonstrated how its principles could be applied to create a better society. Franklin's life exemplifies the highest ideals of Freemasonry, and his recognition within the craft reflects his extraordinary impact. Franklin's Masonic brethren recognized his commitment to the craft early in his life, as evidenced by his rapid ascent to the position of Grand Master of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania in 1734. By the end of his life, his peers referred to him as an illustrious brother, a title bestowed in recognition of his distinguished merit and his adherence to Masonic principles. This honor, not tied to any specific rank or degree, was a reflection of Franklin's exceptional character and his contributions to both the fraternity and society. In Philadelphia, Franklin became a symbol of the fraternity's moral and intellectual ideals. His leadership roles in local and provincial lodges demonstrated his dedication to advancing Freemasonry's mission, and his work as a writer and publisher ensured that its teachings would reach a broader audience. These efforts cemented his status as one of the most influential Masons of his time. Franklin's impact on Freemasonry extended far beyond the American colonies. In Europe, particularly in France, he was a highly respected figure within the Masonic community. His membership and leadership in the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, Loge des Neuf Sœurs, in Paris, exemplify his ability to unite Masonic ideals with diplomatic efforts. As the Lodge's master from 1779 to 1781, Franklin not only advanced the work of the fraternity, but also used it as a platform to strengthen ties between France and the United States during the American Revolution. Franklin's role in initiating the renowned philosopher Voltaire into Freemasonry further highlights his influence in European lodges. Voltaire's initiation in 1778, conducted with Franklin's assistance, was a historic event that brought together two of the Enlightenment's most prominent figures. This moment symbolized the intersection of Masonic values with the intellectual currents of the time, emphasizing the fraternity's commitment to reason, liberty, and human progress. His contributions were further recognized by French Masons when he was elected Venerable d'Honneur, Honorary Worshipful Master, of the respectable Lodge of St. John of Jerusalem in 1783. These honours reflected not only Franklin's high standing within Freemasonry, but also his role as a bridge between American and European Masonic traditions. Franklin's life and work are often interpreted through the lens of Masonic symbolism.
Franklin's life was a testament to the Masonic creed, living truly by the square and guiding himself with the compass.
Franklin's contributions to Freemasonry are symbolized in the fraternity's core emblems, representing moral rectitude, intellectual growth, and civic responsibility.
The square and compasses, representing morality and guidance, are emblematic of his approach to both personal and public life. His scientific experiments, such as his famous kite and key demonstration, reflect the Masonic value of seeking truth and understanding the mysteries of nature. Similarly, his diplomatic achievements, particularly the Treaty of Alliance with France, embody the principles of fraternity and cooperation. Franklin's Masonic apron, which he wore during his time in Paris, remains a cherished artifact of his Masonic legacy. Now displayed at the Musée de la Franc-Maçonnerie in Paris, the apron serves as a tangible reminder of Franklin's role in advancing the craft on both sides of the Atlantic. Franklin's alignment with Masonic principles is perhaps best understood through his philosophy of life.
Masonry is a science founded on morality and reason, and Franklin's life embodied these virtues to their fullest extent. Franklin lived the Masonic ideal of the moral architect, tirelessly working to improve both himself and the world around him.
His emphasis on self-improvement, civic engagement, and the betterment of society reflects the core teachings of the craft. Franklin often wrote about the importance of living plumb, square, and level. Count Mirabeau, the French revolutionary leader, delivered a powerful eulogy for Franklin in 1790, describing him as a philosopher who had advanced the rights of man and the sway of liberty. This tribute, delivered before the French National Assembly, underscored Franklin's impact as a statesman and as a Mason who embodied the ideals of Enlightenment and Freemasonry alike. Franklin's legacy within Freemasonry is reflected in the continued admiration and study of his life by Masons around the world. His example demonstrates how the principles of the craft, brotherhood, self-improvement, and service to humanity can be applied to address the challenges of any era. For modern Freemasons, Franklin remains an inspirational figure whose life serves as a blueprint for living in accordance with the highest ideals of the fraternity. His contributions to Masonic literature, his leadership in lodges, and his integration of Masonic values into his public and private life have made him one of the most celebrated figures in the history of Freemasonry. His writings and actions continue to inspire Masonic scholars and practitioners, offering a timeless model of how the teachings of the craft can guide individuals in their pursuit of knowledge, virtue, and societal progress. As we conclude this exploration of Benjamin Franklin's life as a Freemason, it becomes clear that his Masonic principles were not merely an adjunct to his identity, but a core framework through which he approached the world. Franklin's 6 decades of involvement in Freemasonry demonstrated the enduring power of its ideals: self-improvement, brotherhood, service, and the pursuit of enlightenment. These values informed every facet of his extraordinary life, from his work as a printer and inventor to his role as a diplomat and founding father.
Franklin's Masonic journey exemplifies how the craft's values can serve as a practical guide for personal and societal advancement.
Franklin's initiation into Freemasonry at St. John's Lodge in 1730 or 1731 marked the beginning of a lifelong commitment to the craft. His rapid rise to the position of Grand Master of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania underscored his organizational skills, leadership, and dedication. But Franklin's impact on Freemasonry was not confined to his titles. Through his printing of the Constitutions of the Freemasons, the first Masonic book published in America, he provided a vital resource for the fraternity and helped solidify its presence in the colonies. His writings in the Pennsylvania Gazette and his role in constructing the first Masonic building in America further demonstrated his commitment to spreading Masonic ideals. Franklin's life exemplified the alignment between Masonic values and public service. His contributions to civic infrastructure, such as libraries, fire companies, and hospitals, reflected the Masonic principle of working for the betterment of society. His diplomatic efforts in France, including his leadership in the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, highlighted his ability to use Masonic networks and principles to build alliances and foster unity. Even the founding documents of the United States, especially the Declaration of Independence, resonate with the Masonic ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Throughout his life, Franklin demonstrated how the moral teachings of Freemasonry could be translated into action. His commitment to self-discipline, charity, and intellectual growth was evident not only in his personal philosophy, as expressed in his 13 Virtues, but also in his public endeavors. Franklin lived the Masonic ideal of the moral architect, someone who seeks to construct a better world through reason, justice, and service to humanity. The honors Franklin received within the fraternity, such as his designation as an illustrious brother, reflect the high regard in which he was held by his Masonic peers. Yet Franklin's true legacy lies not in the titles he attained, but in the way he lived his life. His adherence to the principles of being plumb, square, and level in his dealings with others set a standard for Masons and non-Masons alike. As Count Mirabeau so eloquently eulogized him, Franklin was both a philosopher and a liberator, a man whose actions advanced the cause of liberty and enlightenment for all humanity. Franklin's legacy continues to inspire Freemasons worldwide. His life demonstrates how the principles of the craft can be applied to address the challenges of any age, from building communities to fostering international cooperation. For modern Masons, Franklin serves as a model of how to live with purpose and integrity, always striving to improve oneself and contribute to the greater good. Benjamin Franklin's life as a Freemason offers a timeless lesson, that the principles of Freemasonry are not just abstract ideals, but actionable guides for living a meaningful and impactful life. Franklin's example challenges us to embody the values of the craft in our own lives, to build not only ourselves, but also the world around us.
Let us emulate the virtues of Franklin, who lived as a Mason and died a sage.
As we reflect on his legacy, we are reminded that the true measure of a Mason lies not in titles or accolades, but in the enduring impact of their contributions to humanity. Brethren, may we all draw inspiration from Franklin's life and strive to emulate his wisdom, humility, and dedication to the principles of Freemasonry. Let his example guide us as we continue to labour in the quarries of life, building a better future for ourselves, our communities, and the world. So mote it be. Freemasonry has had its fair share of famous brothers since its inception in the early 18th century. Perhaps the standout figure in the fraternity's history in the United States is the first President of the United States, George Washington. George Washington joined the Masonic Lodge in Fredericksburg, Virginia, at the tender age of 20 in 1752. During the War for Independence, he attended various Masonic celebrations and ceremonies in different states. He was also influential in the formation of Masonic lodges that was started by army regiments. At his inauguration in 1791, Washington took his oath on a Bible at St. John's Lodge in New York. Such was his allegiance to Freemasonry. Moreover, during his 2 terms as President of the United States, he toured the country, visiting Masonic lodges and interacting with brothers, most notably in the Carolinas. Most famously, President Washington presided over the cornerstone laying ceremony at the U.S. Capitol building in 1793, a proud moment in Masonic history. This event has also been the catalyst for many conspiracy theorists who believe that such an event is evidence that the Masons control the U.S. government. After his presidency, Washington became Charter Master of Alexandra Lodge 22, where he famously sat for a portrait in Masonic regalia. Such was Washington's commitment to Freemasonry, he was buried with Masonic honours. George Washington was born in Westmoreland, Virginia, and grew up within a thriving planting community. Washington's grandfather originally emigrated to America from England and accumulated 5,000 acres of land, which helped support his family. Washington wasn't formally educated as a young boy, but was homeschooled and received additional lessons from a local church officer. Despite not attending school, Washington managed to learn various subjects, including mathematics, geography, and Latin, and so showed signs of his educational prowess from a young age. As has been mentioned, Washington became a Mason at the age of 20. Records show that the first recorded meeting at the Fredericksburg Lodge, where Washington would become a member, was on September 1st, 1752. Washington was initiated as an entered apprentice at the lodge in a ceremony on November 4th of the same year. He paid £2 3 to become a member of the lodge. On March 3rd, 1753, he passed to the degree of a fellow craft mason and was raised to the sublime degree of a master mason on August 4th of the same year. Washington was fiercely loyal to the lodge in Fredericksburg throughout his life, which was renamed Fredericksburg Lodge No. 4 after the creation of the Grand Lodge of Virginia in 1778. Although he became a Mason in 1752, it wasn't until later in life that Washington really began attending Masonic ceremonies frequently. From 1778, it is recorded that he attended many Masonic functions across the United States. For example, on the 24th of June 1779, Washington attended the American Union Lodge's celebration of the Feast of St. John the Baptist. This meeting was significant, as it allowed Washington to meet with many of the officers and enlisted men within the Connecticut regiments. There is also a record of Washington visiting King Solomon's Lodge in Poughkeepsie, New York, in December of 1783. Throughout the war, Washington traveled throughout the states, meeting Masons and sharing stories. Once the war had ended, Washington accepted his friend's invitation to attend a banquet at Alexandria Lodge No. 39 in June of 1784. After the ceremony, Washington was elected as an honorary member of the lodge. In 1788, Washington agreed to be the charter master of the lodge when it transferred its allegiance from the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania to the Grand Lodge of Virginia. During his time at this lodge, Washington was painted in full Masonic regalia, and after his death, the lodge changed its name to Alexandria Washington Lodge No. 22. When tensions finally broke out into conflict between the British Crown and the American colonies, Washington was chosen to be the Commander-in-Chief of all colonial forces. After a long and brutal conflict, the American colonies under Washington's command defeated the British and won their independence. He retired to the fields of Mount Vernon after years of long battle and service to his people. Yet he was called up for service one more time and was elected as the first President of the United States by unanimous decision. As President, Washington tried to ensure peace and build the nation's capital. After Washington was inaugurated as President in 1789, there is a significant record of his dealings and correspondence with many Masonic local lodges and state Grand Lodges. Such was his enthusiasm and passion for Freemasonry. Washington's most significant act as a Mason occurred whilst he was President of the US. On September the 18th, 1793, he presided at the Masonic ceremonial laying of the United States Capitol cornerstone. When Washington was laid to rest in 1799, Brothers of Alexandria Lodge performed Masonic rites. While there have been many prominent Masons throughout history, perhaps none have been as significant as George Washington. As the first President of the United States and the founder of the nation's capital, Washington is arguably the most influential American of all time. The fact that he was a Mason is essential, as it helped shape his ideals as a man and as a leader. He wrote eloquently about his commitment to Freemasonry, and his attendance at several Masonic ceremonies throughout his life indicates the high regard with which he held his Masonic responsibilities. Before this story begins, a word of respect. The presenter speaks as an outsider, an Australian scholar addressing an American subject, aware that to explore another nation's heritage is, as it were, to swim in someone else's pond. What follows is not a polemic, but an historical appreciation, an account grounded in verifiable sources, examined with reverence for accuracy and for the people whose story it tells. It is offered in the spirit of fraternity, scholarship, and truth. Boston Harbor, March 1775. The city stirs with the noise of empire, soldiers on the wharf, the smell of tanned leather, the murmuring of taverns. Amidst this bustle, 15 free black men assemble beneath the banner of a travelling military lodge of the British Army, its number 441 on the roll of the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Under the light of a single lantern, these men, including a leatherworker and community leader named Prince Hall, kneel to receive the degrees of Freemasonry. Thus begins one of the most remarkable sagas in the moral history of the Atlantic world. Prince Hall himself remains an elusive figure. His date and place of birth are uncertain. Some early sources, now regarded with skepticism, suggested Barbados, while most modern scholars, including historian James Sidbury of Rice University, situate his life firmly in New England. By the 1770s, Hall was a literate, property-owning freeman in Boston, a leather craftsman and small-scale entrepreneur, a Methodist preacher, and an outspoken advocate for education among black Bostonians. He petitioned the Massachusetts legislature in 1777 for the establishment of a school for African American children, arguing, in language echoing the Enlightenment, that every rational being hath a right to the advantage of education. Such petitions, preserved in the Massachusetts archives, show a man both pragmatic and visionary, a craftsman with the moral clarity of a reformer. In that same Enlightenment spirit, Hall was drawn to the fraternity of Freemasonry, whose teachings of liberty, equality, and brotherhood resonated with his conviction that black men too were heirs to the dignity of reason. Yet the lodges of colonial Boston were closed to him. When Hall and his companions applied to the White St. John's Lodge, they were rejected, purely on grounds of race. Refusing exclusion, Hall sought Masonic light elsewhere. The military lodge attached to the 38th Regiment of Foot under the Irish warrant accepted the petition. On the 6th of March 1775, Hall and his brethren were initiated. Their new lodge, called simply the African Lodge, was permitted to meet, process in public, and bury its dead, but not to confer degrees. When the British troops departed at the end of the Revolutionary War, the lodge was left in limbo. Prince Hall, aware that Masonic legitimacy rested on chartered authority, petitioned the Grand Lodge of England. After years of correspondence across the war-torn Atlantic, a formal warrant was issued on the 29th of September 1784, naming the body African Lodge Number 459 on the English Registry. The original document, still preserved in Boston's Masonic archives, arrived by ship 3 years later and was read aloud in May 1787. With that act, African Lodge Number 459 became, as historian Anne Seymour wrote in her 2020 American Heritage article, The Secret History of Prince Hall Freemasonry, the first black institution in the United States to hold legal standing under British authority. It was, in every technical sense, a regular Masonic lodge. Its only difference lay in the colour of its members' skin. Hall himself served as master and later received from England the title of Provincial Grand Master for African Lodges in North America. In 1791, he authorized lodges in Philadelphia and Providence. By his death in 1807, they had formed a rudimentary African Grand Lodge. Afterward, as Seymour notes, his followers renamed it in his honor, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, a name now borne by jurisdictions across the world. Let their color be what it will. In 1797, addressing his brethren in Boston, Prince Hall delivered words that remain luminous with moral courage. Give the right hand of affection and fellowship to whom it justly belongs. Let their colour and complexion be what it will. Let their nation be what it may, for they are your brethren, and it is your indispensable duty to do so. Those lines survive in his published charge to the African Lodge, printed in Boston that year and reissued by blackpast.org. They testify to a man who understood fraternity as moral universality, yet the New Republic refused to hear him. White Grand Lodges in America declined to recognize the African Lodge's charter, even though it came from the same English authority that had chartered their own. Their objections were cloaked in the language of exclusive jurisdiction, the doctrine that only one Grand Lodge could operate within a state, but the underlying motive was racial exclusion. As Masonic historian Christopher Hodapp has written, African Lodge was regular in every sense, except the one that mattered most in America. It was black. Exclusion and endurance. Throughout the 19th century, Prince Hall Freemasonry developed as a parallel world. Lodges multiplied, first in the northeast, then following the Great Migration of freedmen into the South and Midwest after the Civil War. Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Georgia all saw Prince Hall Grand Lodges established before the century's end. Yet recognition never came. In 1875, the Southern Masonic writer Albert Pike, a former Confederate officer, expressed his opposition with chilling clarity. I took my obligations to white men, not to Negroes, he wrote. When I have to accept Negroes as brothers or leave Masonry, I shall leave it. These words, printed in Pike's correspondence and later cited in Roger J. Williams' study Prince Hall Masonic recognition, the first step, 1983, have been contested by some scholars who argue they were private rather than official. Still, they reveal the sentiment that dominated mainstream American Masonry for generations. Despite exclusion, Black Masons flourished. Harold Holzer, historian of the early Republic, observed that for free, blacks in northern cities, lodges and churches provided the only autonomous institutions in which African Americans could assemble without white supervision. In that crucible of limited freedom, Prince Hall lodges became schools of leadership, their rituals blending moral discipline with civic training. As Holzer notes, it was not only a place of secrecy, but of self-formation. The founding of Mother Bethel, Philadelphia, 1791. Inside St. George's Methodist Church, black worshippers are ordered to move to the balcony during prayer. Among them stand two Prince Hall Masons, Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. They rise, refuse humiliation, and walk out. With support from their Masonic brethren, they found the Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, the first independent black denomination in America. Historians of the AME Church record that Prince Hall lodges provided moral and material backing for Allen and Jones, and the church's stained glass windows still display Masonic symbols in gratitude. The story is not allegory. It is documentation of how the Masonic ideal of human equality seeded the growth of black religious autonomy. Prince Hall himself supported early plans for African resettlement, part of the late 18th century Back to Africa movement promoted by the British abolitionist Granville Sharp. But his primary commitment was to education and civic virtue at home. In letters preserved in Boston's archives, he argued that moral improvement would break down the walls of ignorance and prejudice. By the mid-19th century, Prince Hall lodges extended throughout the Free States. In 1847, several of them formed a National Grand Lodge, sometimes called the National Compact, hoping to unite their efforts. Yet internal disagreements over state autonomy caused schism. By the 1870s, the national body had fractured into competing jurisdictions. From these divisions emerged two principal streams still recognized today. Prince Hall affiliated Grand Lodges, tracing descent from the Massachusetts body, and Prince Hall origin lodges descended from the National Compact. The distinction is technical but important, and modern scholars such as Alton Roundtree have cautioned against treating Prince Hall Masonry as a single monolith. Even so, the fraternity's moral stature grew. After emancipation, Prince Hall lodges became vital engines of mutual aid, offering burial insurance, education funds, and social leadership. By the early 20th century, their members included ministers, teachers, businessmen, and professionals, the very backbone of the black middle class. The Lincoln Meeting, Washington, D.C., August 1862. President Abraham Lincoln summons 5 black leaders to the White House. Among them, 4 are Prince Hall Masons. Lincoln proposes colonization, the voluntary emigration of freed slaves to Central America. "Your people," he says, "are the cause of the war." The delegation listens, then declines. They answer, in dignified tones recorded by contemporary newspapers, that African Americans are native to this country and intend to remain. As historian Seymour remarks, their refusal quietly redirected the course of emancipation. Without their intervention, she writes, there might be no Black Washington today. This moment exemplifies the moral poise taught within lodge rooms, restraint without submission, reason over anger, courage expressed through calm. From segregation to civil rights. After Reconstruction, Prince Hall Masonry spread with migration. By 1900, there were established Grand Lodges in most states, including in the South, where racial terror was endemic. Even under Jim Crow, lodges served as sanctuaries for civic organization. In Mississippi, the M.W. Stringer Grand Lodge building in Jackson, completed in 1955, became headquarters for the state NAACP. When civil rights leader Medgar Evers, himself a Prince Hall Mason, was assassinated in 1963, his funeral was held there. Anne Seymour notes that the Stringer Temple became the heart of the civil rights struggle in Mississippi, a Masonic edifice serving as both fortress and forum. Across the nation, Prince Hall lodges provided meeting halls for the NAACP, the Urban League, and later the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. As the civil rights historian Aldon Morris observes in The Origins of the Civil Rights Movement, Free Press, 1984, such institutions formed the organizational backbone of protest. In that sense, Prince Hall Masonry functioned as a hidden architecture of freedom. Among its members were many who shaped 20th century America: labor leader A. Philip Randolph, organizer of the 1963 March on Washington; civil rights strategist Ralph Abernathy; Congressman John Lewis of Georgia, whose activism stretched from Selma to the Capitol; and the jurist Thurgood Marshall, architect of Brown v. Board of Education. All were Prince Hall Masons. As historian Christopher Hodapp summarized, 90% of the founders of black Greek letter fraternities had Masonic ties. The lodge was the seedbed of leadership. The Lodge and the Dream. Atlanta, early 1960s. On Auburn Avenue, the headquarters of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Southern Christian Leadership Conference, stands next door to the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia. Beneath that roof, ministers, lawyers, and activists, many of them Masons, meet in the evenings to plan boycotts and marches. The historian Ed Bowen, himself a 33-degree Mason, later recalled, "Most of the ministers on Auburn Avenue were Masons. So were the doctors and the lawyers. The lodge was where you got things done." Though King himself was never initiated, his father, the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., was a member, and rumors long persisted that the younger King had been made a Mason posthumously. Grandmaster Benjamin Barksdale later clarified that no such posthumous initiation occurred, but the very plausibility of the rumor illustrates the fraternity's intimate presence within the civil rights generation. Recognition and reconciliation. For more than 2 centuries, mainstream, predominantly white, Grand Lodges in America withheld recognition from their Prince Hall counterparts. As late as 1947, when the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts briefly granted recognition, pressure from southern jurisdictions forced a retraction. The historian Elton Roundtree remarks that, "For decades, the wall of segregation within Masonry mirrored the wall of segregation in the nation." A change of conscience began only in the 1980s. In 1989, the Grand Lodge of Connecticut voted to recognize the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of that state, the first such act in the United States. Within a decade, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Colorado followed. Hodapp describes this moment as a collective realization that the fraternity had become a prisoner of its own past. By the early 21st century, most states had acted. Yet, the Deep South lagged. As late as 2017, 6 Grand Lodges, among them Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Arkansas, and West Virginia, still withheld recognition. Gradually, they relented. In 2021, the Grand Lodge of Tennessee extended recognition. Later that year, Georgia followed, passing the motion by overwhelming vote. These developments were documented by HODAP and corroborated in official Grand Lodge proceedings. Recognition in Masonic terms means mutual acknowledgement of legitimacy and the right of members to visit one another's lodges. It does not imply merger. Prince Hall and mainstream Grand Lodges remain sovereign, parallel institutions united by respect. As one Southern Grand Master phrased it after the vote, "We have discovered that we are, after all, of the same light." The Funeral of John Lewis, Atlanta, 2020. The body of Congressman John Lewis lies in state. For the first time in Georgia's history, officers of both the Prince Hall Grand Lodge and the mainstream Grand Lodge stand together to conduct a joint Masonic funeral. As reported by Anne Seymour, 2 centuries of separation were, for an hour, dissolved. The image of white and black Masons side by side, their aprons gleaming under the cathedral lights, became a parable of reconciliation achieved through ritual. Global reach. Today, Prince Hall Freemasonry extends far beyond American borders. Grand Lodges exist in Canada, the Caribbean, Liberia, and West Africa. Lodges under Prince Hall jurisdiction operate on US military bases across Europe and Asia, their banners carried wherever American soldiers serve. In 1993, a Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the Caribbean was inaugurated in Barbados. In 2022, one was chartered in São Paulo, Brazil. Membership estimates vary, but most scholars, including Alton Roundtree, place the global figure around 300,000 members in over 5,000 lodges, making it the largest predominantly African American fraternal organization in existence. In 1996, the United Grand Lodge of England formally declared Prince Hall lodges regular and in amity, thus closing a circle opened more than 2 centuries earlier. The present and the promise. Modern Prince Hall Masonry stands as both an heir to and a custodian of history. Its members sponsor scholarships, support historically black colleges, and engage in community philanthropy. Youth programs, such as the Knights of Pythagoras, teach leadership to adolescents. In cities from Boston to Los Angeles, lodge halls host food drives, literacy classes, and voter registration events. Prince Hall Masonry remains predominantly African American, yet racially open. Men of all ethnicities may petition its lodges, just as black men now freely join mainstream ones. The old barriers have crumbled. But the fraternity's cultural distinctiveness endures, a lineage of resilience, service, and spiritual dignity. As Christopher Hodap observed in an interview for American Heritage, Prince Hall Masonry survives not because it is separate, but because it is faithful to its founder's vision of universal brotherhood and moral excellence. Albert Pike was without question a deeply flawed figure. He was a Confederate general whose command collapsed in scandal, a lawyer who defended slavery and endorsed the expulsion of free black Arkansans, and a Mason who resisted racial equality within the craft. Yet he was also a polymath who mastered languages, reshaped the Scottish Rite, and left an indelible intellectual mark through morals and dogma. This study acknowledges both sides. It confronts his racism, nativism, and failed military career, while exposing how the Lucifer charge grew out of misquotation and outright hoax. The result is a portrait of a man whose brilliance was inseparable from his blind spots. Albert Pike remains one of the most consequential and most controversial figures in 19th century American Freemasonry. To evaluate Pike honestly requires recognition of both his genuine achievements and his serious failings. Early life and Arkansas career. Born in Boston in 1809, Pike demonstrated precocious learning, passing Harvard's entrance examinations, but unable to enroll for financial reasons. He migrated west in 1831, settling in Arkansas, where he taught school, wrote poetry, and in 1834 purchased the Arkansas Advocate newspaper. Admitted to the bar in 1836, he became a prominent lawyer, representing both private clients and native nations, Creek and Choctaw, in major claims against the federal government. He also compiled the first digest of Arkansas Supreme Court decisions. His personal life was marked by marriage to Mary Ann Hamilton, with whom he raised several children. Military service. Pike served as a captain in the Mexican-American War, where his published criticisms of his regiment's leadership led to a duel with future Governor John S. Roane. During the American Civil War, he was commissioned a Confederate brigadier general, charged with commanding native regiments in Indian Territory. His forces fought at the Battle of Pea Ridge in March 1862. Accusations of scalping and mutilation by some native allies created national scandal and caused a rift between Pike and Confederate High Command. He resigned his commission in July 1862. Post-war years. Following a period of exile in Canada, Pike was pardoned in 1865. He resumed law practice in Memphis and then in Washington, D.C. It was in these later decades that Pike made his greatest mark as a Mason, serving as Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, from 1859 until his death in 1891. He systematized rituals across the Rite's 29 higher degrees and, in 1871, published Morals and Dogma, a vast comparative study of religion, philosophy, and morality intended as a guide for initiates. Though often difficult reading, the book became a defining text for U.S. Scottish Rite Freemasonry. Intellectual contributions. Pike's intellectual range was remarkable. He mastered Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Sanskrit, producing translations and studies of Vedic texts, and immersed himself in Kabbalistic, Hermetic, and Gnostic sources. In Masonic contexts, he sought to align the degrees of the Scottish Rite with what he believed to be universal truths found across ancient religions. His erudition and system building made him the single most influential figure in shaping the Scottish Rite in the United States. Negative aspects and controversies. Slavery and race. Pike lived and prospered in slaveholding Arkansas. While direct proof that he personally owned enslaved people is inconclusive, records indicate that his wife's family held slaves and that enslaved persons were used as collateral in a mortgage transaction. In 1858, Pike was a signatory of a Little Rock circular urging the expulsion of free black residents from Arkansas, leading to the state's infamous 1859 expulsion law. Within Masonry, Pike's racial views were exclusionary. In 1875, he wrote that he had taken his obligations to white men, not Negroes, though he acknowledged Prince Hall Masonry's original legitimacy. Nativism. Pike played a role in organizing the Know Nothing American Party in Arkansas in the 1850s, a movement explicitly anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic. Civil War record. His Confederate service is associated with the Pea Ridge controversy. Though he denied direct responsibility for atrocities, his leadership was regarded as ineffective, and his resignation was not lamented in Richmond. Ku Klux Klan allegations. From the early 20th century, Pike has been linked by some writers with the original Ku Klux Klan, sometimes described as its chief judicial officer. These claims originate in later pro-Klan narratives, notably Walter L. Fleming's 1905 edition of Ku Klux Klan, its origin, growth, and disbandment, and remain unsubstantiated by contemporary records. Most modern historians classify the claim as unproven. Legacy. Albert Pike died in Washington, D.C. on the 2nd of April, 1891. His remains were later moved to the House of the Temple, headquarters of the Southern Jurisdiction Scottish Rite. His legacy remains contested. To admirers, he was the great systematizer of American Freemasonry, a polymath who sought to unite the wisdom of the ages. To critics, he was a Confederate general tainted by slavery and racism, a nativist politician, and an author whose abstruse prose invited dangerous misinterpretation. Both views contain truth. A full and fair study of Pike must acknowledge his profound contributions to Masonic philosophy, while recognizing the moral failings that mark his place in the broader history of 19th century America. Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, 1871, contains only a handful of references to Lucifer, but these have been disproportionately cited in allegations of Pike's Luciferianism. It is crucial to examine the actual passages in full context and original wording to discern Pike's meaning. Notably, the term Lucifer, Latin for light-bearer, appears about 6 to 8 times in the book, concentrated in 2 sections: the lecture on the 3rd degree Master Mason and that on the 19th degree Grand Pontiff. In the 3rd degree Master Mason lecture, Pike uses Lucifer in a rhetorical and comparative sense. One occurrence is a critique of hypocrisy. Pike lists examples of moral hypocrisy and says to inculcate humility and in pride surpass Lucifer is to be like a whited sepulchre, outwardly pure but inwardly corrupt. Here, Lucifer clearly symbolizes pride, alluding to the proverbial pride of the fallen angel in Christian tradition. Pike is not praising Lucifer at all. Rather, he's admonishing those who outdo the devil in arrogance while feigning piety. Later in the 3rd degree lecture, Pike gives a more esoteric explanation drawn from occult and Kabbalistic sources, much of which he openly extracted or paraphrased from the 19th century French occultist Eliphas Lévy. In this passage, Pike discusses the nature of Satan and evil in symbolic terms. The true name of Satan, the Kabbalists say, is that of Yahweh reversed. For Satan is not a black god, but the negation of God. For the initiates, this is not a person, but a force created for good, but which may serve for evil. They represent this force, under the mythologic and horned form of the god Pan. Thence came the he-goat of the Sabbat, brother of the ancient serpent, and the light-bearer, Phosphor, of which the poets have made the false Lucifer of the legend. Several important points emerge from this dense passage. Pike, following Lévy, distinguishes the mythic Lucifer of Christian legend, essentially a poetic personification of the force of evil, from its true nature. The term light-bearer or phosphor is used in an initiatic sense. an astral or life force that can be benevolent or maleficent. The false Lucifer is the vulgar legend of a personalized devil. In other words, Pike is arguing that the popular story of Lucifer as an evil fallen angel is a misinterpretation, false, of an impersonal force or principle which, in itself, was created for good, but can be turned to evil. Far from endorsing devil worship, Pike is demythologizing Lucifer. He regards the Lucifer of Christian legend as a distortion, the false Lucifer, of a deeper truth intelligible only to initiates. This heavily Gnostic and Hermetic interpretation portrays Satan, Lucifer, not as an independent evil god, but as the symbol of the negative or fallen aspect of the divine, essentially the absence or inversion of God, hence Yahweh reversed. The most famous and widely misquoted lines about Lucifer occur in the 19th degree lecture, Grand Pontiff. He writes, "The apocalypse is, to those who receive the 19th degree, the apotheosis of that sublime faith which aspires to God alone and despises all the pomps and works of Lucifer. Lucifer, the light-bearer. Strange and mysterious name to give to the spirit of darkness. Lucifer, the son of the morning. Is it he who bears the light, and with its splendours intolerable blinds feeble, sensual, or selfish souls? Doubt it not, for traditions are full of divine revelations and inspirations." In context, Pike is actually denouncing Lucifer's pomp and works. He expresses rhetorical astonishment that the spirit of darkness is called light-bearer, and pointedly asks, paraphrasing Isaiah 14 verse 12, whether Lucifer truly bears light that blinds the unworthy. Rather, Pike is suggesting that evil can appear as false brilliance. Lucifer's light is splendour that blinds the selfish and the vain. In other words, those of impure heart will be dazzled and misled by Lucifer's apparent light. Pike is here invoking the traditional metaphor of Lucifer as an angel of light who deceives, not endorsing Lucifer as a benevolent being. Indeed, he prefaces the exclamation by reaffirming that the initiatic faith despises all the pomps and works of Lucifer. Pike's tone is poetic and somewhat ironical. He highlights the paradox of calling a dark force light-bearer, only to stress that this false light serves to test or punish the unworthy. Immediately following those dramatic lines, Pike continues to say that traditions are full of divine revelations given in many ages and creeds, implying that truth and inspiration are not confined to one faith. He mentions that even pagan sages like Plato and Philo were inspired. This indicates that Pike's intent is to place the Christian story of the war in heaven, Lucifer's fall, into a broader, symbolic, and inclusive context of divine truth in many traditions. In short, when read in full, Pike's Lucifer passages do not glorify Lucifer as a deity. Rather, they use Lucifer as a symbol, sometimes of pride and evil, to be scorned, and sometimes of the paradoxical nature of enlightenment, whereby true divine light can be perverted to blind the foolish. Pike's own summary elsewhere in Morals and Dogma underscores this. The conviction of all men that God is good led to a belief in a devil, the fallen Lucifer or light-bearer, an attempt to explain the existence of evil. In other words, humanity imagined a fallen light-bearer to account for evil in a world governed by a good God. To avoid doubt, we may catalogue the exact references to Lucifer in the standard edition of Morals and Dogma, 3rd degree, Master Mason, to inculcate humility and in pride surpass Lucifer, page 73. Context: condemning hypocritical pride by comparing it to Lucifer's fall, negative, pejorative usage. Third degree, Master Mason. The light bearer or phosphor, of which the poets have made the false Lucifer of the legend. Page 102. Context: occult philosophical discussion, drawn from Levi, explaining that the false Lucifer of Christian legend is a misrepresentation of a force/principle, neutral usage in explanation, Lucifer as legend, not literal. 19th degree, Grand Pontiff. Aspires to God alone and despises all the pomps and works of Lucifer. Page 321. Context: affirming that the Masonic faith rejects Lucifer's works, explicit rejection of Luciferian pomps. 19th degree, Grand Pontiff. Lucifer, the light bearer. Lucifer, the son of the morning. Doubt it not. Page 321. Context: rhetorical flourish, highlighting the paradox of the name Lucifer, and warning that Lucifer's light can blind the profane. Cautionary usage, often misquoted. 19th degree, Grand Pontiff. The fallen Lucifer, or light-bearer, Shaitan the adversary, Ahriman and Typhon. Piece 324. Context: explaining that cultures personified the principle of evil as figures like a fallen Lucifer. Neutral explanatory usage, equating Lucifer with similar mythic figures like Satan, Ahriman, etc. On the contrary, Pike either uses Lucifer as a negative exemplar, the proud spirit cast down, or as a misunderstood symbol for a natural force. The oft-quoted lines on page 321 in fact say the opposite of what anti-Masonic conspiracy theorists claim. Pike does not proclaim Lucifer is God, or encourage Lucifer worship anywhere in morals and dogma. This reinforces that Pike offered these Lucifer references not as articles of faith, but as allegorical insights within a much broader comparative religious framework. Understanding Pike's use of Lucifer requires situating it in his broader esoteric worldview. Albert Pike was a polymath and mystic who drew on Gnostic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Christian sources in constructing his Masonic lectures. In Morals and Dogma, Pike references everything from Hebrew Kabbalah and Neoplatonism to Hindu scriptures, and Eliphas Levi, whose works on magic and symbolism deeply influenced Pike. Within this eclectic tapestry, figures like Lucifer appear not as literal biblical personages, but as symbols loaded with multiple layers of meaning. Two key motifs frame Pike's approach to Lucifer: the Latin meaning of the name and the Lucifer myth as allegory. Lucifer in Latin simply means light bringer, from lux light plus fera to bear. Early Christian Latin usage preserved this sense. Notably, Lucifer appears in the Vulgate Bible once, Isaiah 14 verse 12, as a translation of Helel ben Shachar, shining one, son of dawn, a taunt addressed to the king of Babylon who fell from his heights. Over centuries, Christian interpreters, and especially English literary tradition via Milton's Paradise Lost, repurposed Lucifer as a proper name for Satan before his fall. In his writings, he often plays on the irony that a word meaning light-bearer became associated with the Prince of Darkness. Pike's answer is rooted in Kabbalistic and Gnostic interpretations of evil. As seen in the third-degree lecture excerpt, Pike, via Levi, notes that Kabbalists viewed the devil not as an independent power, but as the inverse of God, the negation of God. The force personified as Satan, Lucifer is, in this view, originally good, part of God's creation, but becomes evil when isolated from the divine harmony. This aligns with certain Gnostic sects and occult philosophies, where the figure of Lucifer can be seen, controversially, as a misunderstood agent of enlightenment, or at least as a necessary foil in the cosmic order. For example, 19th century esotericists sometimes recast Lucifer in almost Promethean terms, a bringer of light or knowledge against tyrannical authority. Pike himself stops short of any open praise of Lucifer, but he does engage with the idea that knowledge and divine light can be corrupted into prideful rebellion, hence Lucifer's fall. In Pike's words, "For the initiates, Satan, Lucifer, is not a person but a force, the instrument of liberty or free will." This remarkable statement reflects a Hermetic worldview. Lucifer represents the force of intellect and freedom, which can lead to enlightenment or to destruction depending on how it's used. In positive terms, that force is phosphoros, Greek for light bringer, equivalent to Lucifer. In negative terms, it becomes the false Lucifer of legend that the poets turned into a demon. Pike thus implies that the wise understand Lucifer as a metaphor for the dual-edged nature of knowledge and free will, whereas the profane simply demonize it. In some Gnostic Christian texts, the figure bringing knowledge, for instance the serpent in Eden or Lucifer in later lore, is cast in a heroic or ambivalent light, seen as liberator of mankind from ignorance against a jealous demiurge. Pike was familiar with Gnostic ideas. He mentions early heresiarchs like Simon Magus and notes how they mistaken and personified the Logos or wisdom. However, Pike remained within a broadly theistic framework. He was not a dualist, positing two gods. He firmly states the ultimate unity and goodness of God. Thus, when Pike invokes Lucifer, he is as likely to quote Isaiah 14 chapter 12, "Lucifer, son of the morning, how art thou fallen?" as he is to draw on classical or occult references. For instance, in the third degree lecture, he alludes to Pan and the goat of Mendes, imagery associated with pagan nature gods and later with the occult, Baphomet, as embodiments of the generative force that churches misconstrued as the devil. By linking Pan, the serpent, and phosphor, morning star, together, Pike echoes the Renaissance and Enlightenment era explorations of Hermetic symbolism, where the morning star could symbolize intellectual illumination as well as, paradoxically, the ego that defies God. Despite his occult interests, Pike repeatedly affirms core virtues of Christianity, truth, charity, hope, and often quotes the Bible and Christian fathers. In the very passage where he discusses Lucifer in the 19th degree lecture, his larger point is exalting a faith that aspires to God alone. The mention of Lucifer serves as a contrast to the true light of God. Pike's theology, if we may call it that, is dualist only in a metaphorical sense. Light versus darkness, knowledge versus ignorance, selfish pride versus divine truth. Lucifer falls on the negative side of that equation, the darkness masquerading as light. Pike warns that many feeble or selfish souls are blinded by that false light. So, while Pike ventures far beyond orthodox theology in his sources, the moral he draws is not far from Christian teaching. Pride and self-idolatry lead to spiritual blindness. In summary, Albert Pike's engagement with Lucifer is symbolic, philosophical, and steeped in esoteric syncretism. He draws on Hermetic Kabbalistic ideas to interpret Lucifer as a principle of light and liberty that, when perverted by ego, becomes a force of darkness. He engages Gnostic themes of hidden wisdom and false appearances, yet remains grounded in a fundamentally moralistic stance, good versus evil, with God as the ultimate good. Pike's Lucifer is part of a rich tapestry of symbolism. It is not the devil of simple church catechism, but neither is it an object of worship. Indeed, Pike famously wrote that Masonry uses false explanations to mislead the profane, to conceal the truth, which it calls light. In that vein, his references to Lucifer can themselves be seen as a test. Those with imperfect reason might take them at face value and accuse Masonry of Lucifer worship, whereas the adepts perceive the deeper allegory of inner light versus outer darkness. Despite the nuanced and often critical role Lucifer plays in Pike's writings, by the late 19th century, a sensational narrative had arisen accusing Albert Pike and Freemasonry at large of literal Lucifer worship. This elaborate hoax, orchestrated by French provocateur Léo Taxil, real name Gabriel Hogan Pages, in the 1880s to 1890s, fabricated an entire Luciferian conspiracy within high-grade Freemasonry and falsely cast Pike as its ringleader. Léo Taxil had initially been an anti-clerical writer who ironically converted to Catholicism, only to then produce a series of fantastical anti-Masonic publications designed to titillate the Catholic audience. In 1886, Taxil began publishing exposés of Freemasonry, but it was in 1891, shortly after Pike's death in 1891, that he unveiled his grandest fraud, the tale of Palladian Freemasonry. According to Taxil, there existed a secret inner circle of Freemasonry called the Palladium, headquartered in Charleston, South Carolina, where Pike lived, dedicated to worshipping Lucifer and satanic rites. Taxil concocted a cast of characters, most famously a mystic woman named Diana Vaughan, who was purportedly a high priestess in this Luciferian order, but later repented and converted to Catholicism. Through books and articles, allegedly written by Diana Vaughan, but actually penned by Taxil, he spun out lurid stories of demons, devil worship, and instructions from Master Albert Pike. A key piece of fabricated evidence from the Taxil hoax was a set of paragraphs, now sometimes called Pike's Luciferian Encyclical. In 1894, the French anti-Masonic author Abbé Abel Clarin de la Rive published a book, La femme et l'enfant dans la franc-maçonnerie universelle, Woman and Child in Universal Freemasonry, in which he reproduced a purported letter from Albert Pike to high-ranking Freemasons. This letter, entirely spurious, is the source of the notorious quotation in which Pike is made to declare Lucifer as God. Reeves' book claims that on July 14, 1889, Pike, as Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry, issued instructions to 23 Supreme Councils, including, "That which we must say to the crowd is, we worship a God, but it is the God that one adores without superstition. Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately, Adonai is also God. The true and pure philosophical religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil." This outrageous proclamation, placing Lucifer as a benevolent deity and demonizing the biblical God, Adonai, never appeared in any of Pike's writings. It is entirely a fabrication of the anti-Masonic fringe. As the Taxil Hoax Wiki summarizes, while Clarin de la Rive published this quotation, citing Diana Vaughan as the source, it does not appear in Taxil's writings proper, but was likely concocted as part of the Diana Vaughan narratives. The Catholic Church, which had long condemned Freemasonry, e.g. Pope Leo XIII's 1884 encyclical Humanum Genus, explicitly suggested Masons were in league with the kingdom of Satan, found vindication in Taxil's revelations. Anti-Masonic activists across Europe seized on the idea of Luciferian Freemasonry. Albert Pike, by virtue of his prominence and the convenient fact that he resided in Charleston, the supposed world capital of palladism, became the chief villain in this myth. Karl Hax, another pseudonym used to write Le Diable au XIXe siècle, the devil in the 19th century, churned out ever more salacious details. That the palladists conducted satanic masses, that Diana Vaughan conversed with demons. One demon, Taxil claimed, even played the piano in the shape of a crocodile. And that Pike's Freemasonry indulged in orgies with the devil. Taxil brazenly told the audience, with a mixture of pride and cynicism, that he created absurd lies, so grotesque he thought people would see the joke. But instead, the public made me the arch-liar of the period, gobbling up every word. Taxil's confession was printed in Le Frondeur newspaper and caused great embarrassment to the Catholic establishment that had endorsed his stories. Interestingly, even Abbé Clarin de la Rive, who had circulated the fake Pike letter, publicly recanted his belief in Diana Vaughan after Taxil's hoax was revealed. Even after Taxil's confession, the lurid idea of Freemasons secretly worshipping Lucifer proved too delectable for conspiracy theorists to let die. The forged Pike Luciferian doctrine quote was reprinted in later anti-Masonic and anti-occult works, often without mention of its true origin. Edith Starr Miller, Lady Queensborough, in her book Occult Theocracy, 1933, quoted the Pike "Lucifer is God" passage in full, as if genuine. In the mid-20th century and beyond, fundamentalist Christian anti-Masonic tracts, including Chick publications, comics, and various evangelical books, have repeated the claim that Albert Pike taught that Lucifer was God of Freemasonry. It became a staple of the modern Masonic conspiracy genre. Brent Morris, a Masonic historian, aptly calls it the lie that will not die, noting that no other falsehood has captured the imagination of anti-Masons quite like this Leo Taxil hoax. In 1896, before Taxil confessed, Arthur Edward Waite, a noted British mystic and scholar, had already smelled a rat and wrote Devil Worship in France, a scathing debunk of the Taxil/Vaughan claims. The Grand Lodge of British Columbia and Yukon has an online bulletin expressly documenting Leo Taxil's confession and clarifying that all the Palladium/Lucifer stories were fraudulent. A 1913 edition of the Catholic Encyclopedia, New Advent, entry on Taxil concedes he fabricated the Diana Vaughan memoirs and that his motive was to lampoon the Church's credulity. Thus, by the early 20th century, educated opinion had exposed the hoax, yet in the shadows the myth persisted, continuously republished by those with an anti-Masonic agenda. To summarize the historical trajectory, Albert Pike himself was never a Luciferian except in the minds of his detractors. The direct catalyst for the Luciferian slander was the Taxil hoax, which produced fake evidence of Lucifer worshipping Freemasons and falsely attributed the most extreme statements to Pike. This was amplified by a climate of 19th century anti-Masonic conspiracy theories, which often went hand in hand with anti-Semitic and anti-occult sentiments in Catholic and reactionary literature. Indeed, Taxil's fabrications played upon the age-old trope of secret societies as devilish anti-church cabals. After Taxil's exposure, the legend took on a life of its own in conspiracy literature throughout the 20th century, from Lady Queensborough's Occult Theocracy in in 1933 to modern internet memes. It is telling that even today one can find the fraudulent Pike quote circulating on social media as proof of Masonic Satanism, oblivious to the fact it was a Victorian-era practical joke that deceived many, then was admitted as false. It exploited the mysterious aura of Pike's Morals and Dogma, a book little understood by the general public, by grafting onto it a sensational narrative entirely foreign to Pike's actual content. To anyone who reads Pike's real words, as we did in Section 1, the absurdity of the hoax is evident. Pike's Lucifer is a symbol of pride and false light to be shunned, not a god to be worshipped. Having examined Pike's actual words, his philosophical context, and the origins of the Lucifer worship accusation, we can now render an informed judgment on the credibility of the Luciferian allegations. Quite simply, the claim that Albert Pike was a Luciferian, in the sense of a devil worshipper or promoter of Lucifer as a god, is unfounded and false. First, on a textual and doctrinal level, Pike's Morals and Dogma contains no endorsement of Lucifer as a deity. Nowhere does Pike encourage his readers to pray to or revere Lucifer. In fact, whenever Lucifer is mentioned, it is either as a pejorative example, the arrogant angel of pride, or as a metaphor for something else, the hidden truth that can be twisted, the false light. Pike's moral framework is about aspiring to God, the source of light, and shunning evil, darkness. He speaks often of God, using terms like the deity, the grand architect, etc., in reverential terms, and Lucifer figures in his work only as a symbol related to the problem of evil. If one were to accuse Pike of heresy, one might note his interest in non-Christian wisdom and perhaps an unorthodox interpretation of Satan's role, but that is very different from worshipping Satan. Pike explicitly states, for instance, that the evil force, which people personify as Satan, is a force created for good, but which may serve for evil. This is a nuanced, perhaps romantic-era view of the devil, seeing even Lucifer as part of God's plan, in a way, but it is not Luciferianism as a religion. Traditional Luciferianism, as understood in occult circles, is a system where Lucifer is venerable as a source of light, or even as a liberator. Pike does not advocate that. Second, historically reputable scholars and primary witnesses concur that Pike was not a Luciferian in the malicious sense. Frederick Gregorius concludes, "While Pike was not by any definition a Satanist or a Luciferian, the ambivalent description of Lucifer in Morals and Dogma has contributed to the image of him as the primary proponent of Luciferian Masonry." This neatly summarizes the situation. Pike's intent was not Luciferian, but the way he discussed Lucifer, in a learned, perhaps convoluted manner, unfortunately gave ammunition to those who would paint him as a Luciferian. In retrospect, Pike's tone was risky. Without clarification, lines like "Lucifer, doubt it not" can certainly be misconstrued. But to any fair-minded reader, Pike's denials of evil, he talks of despising Lucifer's pomps, negating Satan, etc., and his theistic affirmations make the accusation of worshipping Lucifer untenable. Third, the allegations rest almost entirely on hoaxes and hostile secondary sources, not on Pike's own actions or words. No historian today gives any credence to the idea of a Palladian rite led by Pike. Brent Morris have published detailed refutations, e.g. Morris's article Albert Pike's Luciferian Doctrine, The Lie That Will Not Die, which dissects the quote's provenance and urges readers to actually read Pike's text instead of believing unfounded claims. When we strip away the taxal embellishments, there is zero evidence that Pike or any mainstream Masonic body ever proclaimed Lucifer is God. On the contrary, Pike's writings, private correspondences, and the policies of the Scottish Rite all point to conventional deism, theism, with a heavy dose of allegory and symbolism, yes, but not devil worship. The Scottish Rite's Supreme Council in Pike's time opened their meetings with prayer to God, Almighty Father of the universe, not to Lucifer. Pike himself, in his 1868 message to the Supreme Council, spoke of Masonry's core values as belief in God, love of neighbour, etc., with no hint of subversion. Fourth, one should consider Pike's character and life. Albert Pike was a lawyer, a poet, a Civil War Confederate general, and a devoted Mason. He spent decades of his life in an almost monk-like scholarly retreat, poring over ancient texts to draw moral lessons for the Masonic degrees. The taxal hoax capitalized on the fact that Pike was distant and mysterious to most people, an elderly savant in Charleston, which made him an inviting target for myth-making. But primary accounts from those who knew Pike, fellow Masons, recall him as austere, brilliant, and perhaps a bit irascible, but certainly not a leader of a satanic cult. The complete implausibility of the grand Luciferian conspiracy, requiring, as Brent Morris Riley noted, that millions of Masons keep such a blasphemous secret without a peep of protest, also diminishes the credibility of the allegations. In fairness, what can we say about Pike's own view of Lucifer? At most, Pike could be described as having a philosophical Luciferianism in the literary sense, meaning he was intrigued by the figure of Lucifer as a metaphor, akin to how poets like Shelley or Byron saw the figure of the rebel angel. Pike's references show he understood the mythic and allegorical power of Lucifer as the fallen morning star, a figure representing knowledge, pride, and the fall. Pike might even agree with some Gnostics that the pursuit of knowledge, Lucifer's light, can appear heroic, but becomes evil when divorced from divine love. In one private lecture, unpublished in his lifetime, Pike muses that good and evil are coexistent, light and darkness, and that God's plan permits a Lucifer to test and challenge humanity, ultimately for good's ends. To conclude, the Luciferian claims against Albert Pike collapse under scrutiny. Pike's actual morals and dogma text, read as a whole, reveals a man who revered divine light, by whatever name, Holy Spirit, truth, wisdom, and abhorred what he saw as false lights of tyranny, bigotry, and self-worship, which he sometimes personified as Lucifer. The irony is rich. Pike's ambivalence about the Lucifer legend was meant to teach a moral lesson, yet that very ambivalence was twisted by others to defame him. Academically and objectively, we must affirm that Albert Pike was no Lucifer worshipper. In the final analysis, Pike's legacy should be judged on what he actually wrote and did. As researchers, we give Albert Pike the same fairness he extended to all faiths in morals and dogma. We separate the truths from the impostures. The truth is that Pike's Lucifer was a symbol of the dilemma of free will and knowledge. To label Pike a Luciferian is to fundamentally misunderstand or misrepresent both the man and his writings. Perhaps the most romantic story of Freemasonry. The fuel which the alleged abduction and murder of William Morgan supplied to the anti-Masonic hysteria of 100 years ago, and the gradual emergence of the ancient craft from the cloud which threatened to extinguish it, is a tale which all Freemasons may ponder to their enlightenment. William Morgan, a brickmason, lived in Batavia, New York, from 1824 to 1826. Accounts of him differ widely, as they do of any notorious person. Few are so wicked as to be without friends. Few are so good they have not their detractors. From the estimates of both enemies and friends, the years have brought an evaluation of Morgan which shows him as a shiftless rolling stone, uneducated but shrewd, careless of financial obligations, often arrested for debt, idle and improvident, frequently the beneficiary of Masonic charity. That he was really a Mason is doubtful. No record of his raising or lodge membership exists, but it is certain he received the Royal Arch in Western Star Chapter RAM No. 32 of Leroy, New York. It is supposed that he was an eavesdropper and lied his way into a lodge in Rochester by imposing on a friend and employer who was led to vouch for him in Wells Lodge No. 282 at Batavia. Judge Abenza Mix of Batavia, a Mason of unquestioned reputation, wrote of this alleged Masonic membership, "There must have been a most reprehensible laxity among the Masons of both Rochester and Leroy, for there is no evidence adduced, then or afterwards, that he ever received any Masonic degree save the Royal Arch on May the 31st, 1825, at Leroy." At any rate, he visited lodges, was willing to assist, made Masonic speeches, took part in degrees. When companions of Batavia asked for a Royal Arch chapter, he was among those who signed the petition. But suspicion of his regularity began to grow, and his name was omitted as a member when the charter was granted. Just how much this incident inspired the enmity he developed for the fraternity is only a guess. Doubtless it had much to do with it. Enemy he became, and it became known that he had applied for copyright on a book which was to expose Masonic ritual, secret and procedure. In spite of the deep resentment which this proposed exposé created, Morgan entered into a contract on March 13, 1826, with 3 men for the publication of this work. These were David C. Miller, an entered apprentice of 20 years standing, stopped from advancement for a cause, who thus held a grudge against the fraternity; John Davids, Morgan's landlord, and Russell Dyer, of whom little is known. These 3 entered into a penal bond of $500,000 to pay Morgan 1/4 of the profits of the book. Morgan boasted in bars and on the street of his progress in writing this book. The more he bragged, the higher the feeling against him ran, and the greater the determination engendered that the exposé should never appear. Brethren were deeply angered, fearful that were the secrets of Freemasonry exposed, the order would die out. Feeling ran high. Matters came to a head in September 1826. Morgan was arrested for the theft of a shirt and tie. Of this he was acquitted, but immediately rearrested for failure to pay a debt of $2.68 and jailed. After 1 day behind bars, someone paid the debt. When he was released, he left in a coach with several men, apparently not of his own free will. He was taken to Fort Niagara and there confined in an unused magazine. Then Morgan disappeared. What happened to William Morgan? Enemies of the craft said Freemasons had kidnapped and murdered him to prevent the publication of his exposé. Freemasons, of course, indignantly denied the charge. As time went on and Morgan was not found, members of the craft disavowed any approval of any such act, if it had been committed. Governor Clinton, past Grand Master, issued proclamation after proclamation, the last one offering $2,000 reward that, if living, Morgan might be returned to his family, if murdered, that the perpetrators might be brought to condign punishment. It was not too difficult to discover that Masons were concerned in Morgan's 125-mile journey to Fort Niagara. 3 members of the craft, Chesebro, Lawson, and Sawyer, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to seize and secrete Morgan, and, together with Eli Bruce, sheriff, and one John Whitney, all served terms in prison for the offence. But murder could not be proved, for no body was found. In October 1827, a body washed ashore 40 miles below Fort Niagara. Morgan's widow identified the body, although it was dressed in other clothes than her husband had worn alive, was bearded, although Morgan was clean-shaven, had a full head of hair, although Morgan was bald. Thurlow Weed, Rochester editor, was accused of having the corpse shaved and of adding long white hairs to ears and nostrils to simulate the appearance of Morgan. The first inquest decided that this was, indeed, the body of William Morgan. 3 inquests were held in all. The third decided on the unimpeachable evidence of Mrs. Sarah Munro, who minutely described the body, its marks, and the clothes it wore, that the corpse was not William Morgan, but Timothy Munro of Clark, Canada, her husband. Commonplace and unexciting truth seldom catches up with scandalous, electrifying, remarkable falsehood. William Morgan had disappeared. Freemasons had been convicted of abducting him. A body had been found and identified as Morgan. That better evidence and a less excited jury had later reversed this identification was anticlimactic. The stories of Morgan's murder persisted. Thurlow Weed, whom history shows as an unscrupulous opportunist, no matter what the exact truth of his activities with the body may have been, added fuel to the flames. Weed died in 1882. On his deathbed, he stated that in 1860, 22 years earlier, John Whitney, who had been convicted in the conspiracy charge, confessed to him the full details of the murder of Morgan. According to this alleged confession, Whitney and 4 others carried the abducted Morgan in a boat to the centre of the river, bound him with chains, and dumped him overboard. Weed stated, and here his memory did fail him, that Whitney had promised to dictate and sign this confession, but died before he could do so. But Whitney died in 1869, 9 years after. Whitney did indeed tell a story, not to Thurlow Weed, who was his accuser in the conspiracy case and whom he hated, but to Robert Morris. This story is both the most probable and the best attested of any we have as to the true fate of William Morgan. Whitney told Morris that he had consulted with Governor Clinton at Albany relative to what could be done to prevent Morgan executing his plans to print the exposé. Clinton sternly forbade any illegal moves, but suggested the purchase of the Morgan manuscript for enough money to enable Morgan to move beyond the reach of the influence and probable enmity of his associates in the publishing enterprise. From some source, Masonic, Governor Clinton? Whitney was assured of any amount needed up to $1,000, which was a great sum in those days. In Batavia, Whitney summoned Morgan to a conference in which the bribe was temptingly held forth. On the one hand, the enmity of all, persecution, continual danger, for it is not improbable that threats were mingled in with the bribe. On the other hand, money, safety, freedom from a plan to publish which held much of danger. If Morgan would take his $500, go to Canada, disappear, his family would be provided for and later sent to him. Morgan agreed. He was to be arrested and kidnapped to make it easy to get away from Miller and his associates. Whitney feared that without some such spectacular escape, Morgan might at the last moment decline to go through with the plan, fearing reprisals from his friends in the publishing venture. Whitney told Morris that 2 Canadian Masons received Morgan from the hands of his kidnappers at Fort Niagara, travelled with him a day and a night to a place near Hamilton, Ontario, where they paid him the $500, receiving his receipt and signed agreement never to return without permission of Captain William King, Sheriff Bruce, or Whitney. Later, there were 2 other confessions of complicity in the murder of Morgan, neither consistent with the facts. Doubtless they were of the same hysterical origin which leads so many notoriety seekers to confess to crimes which by no possibility they could have committed. Did William Morgan choose the easier way, disappearing with $500 from a dangerous situation, eliminating from his responsibilities a wife and family suddenly burdensome, and, in a new freedom, ship on a vessel from Montreal and out into the world, there to come to an unknown end? Or was he basely murdered by Masons, who thought the crime less than the evil results to follow on the publication of Morgan's book? No man knows. No incontestable evidence can be adduced, or was ever adduced, definitely to prove either solution. All that is undoubted is that William Morgan was apparently kidnapped and did disappear. It is difficult, 100 years after, to understand the extent and power of the widespread excitement and passions this incident created. For the fame and infamy of the Morgan affair spread over an immense territory. It was the beginning of an anti-Masonic sentiment which grew and spread like wildfire. Meetings were held. The order was denounced by press and pulpit. An anti-Masonic paper was started, with Thurlow Weed as editor, soon joined by the Anti-Masonic Review in New York City. The many groups in Pennsylvania, already opposed to any oath-bound society, including the Quakers, Lutherans, Mennonites, Dunkards, Moravians, Schweckenfelders, and the German Reformed Church, were aroused to a high pitch of feeling against the alleged murderers and kidnappers, the Freemasons. The anti-Masonic excitement spread fast and far. Gould, in his History of Freemasonry, thus epitomizes the spirit of that time. This country has seen fierce and bitter political contests, but no other has approached the bitterness of this campaign against the Masons. No society, civil, military, or religious, escaped its influence. No relation of family or friends was a barrier to it. The hatred of Masonry was carried everywhere, and there was no retreat so sacred that it did not enter. Not only were teachers and pastors driven from their stations, but the children of Masons were excluded from the schools, and members from their churches. The sacrament was refused to Masons by a formal vote of the Church, for no other offence than their Masonic connection. Families were divided. Brother was arrayed against brother, father against son, even wives against their husbands. Desperate efforts were made to take away the chartered rights from Masonic corporations, and to pass laws that would prevent Masons from holding their meetings and performing their ceremonies. The pressure was so strong that withdrawals by individuals and bodies were numerous. In 1827, 227 lodges were represented in the Grand Lodge of New York. In 1835, the number had dwindled to just 41. Every lodge in the state of Vermont surrendered its charter or became dormant, and the Grand Lodge for several years ceased to hold its sessions. As in Vermont, so also in Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and, in lesser degrees, in several other states. The Masonic temple was cleft in twain, its brotherhood scattered, its trestle board without work, its working tools shattered. Thus, Masonry endured the penalty of the mistaken zeal of those fearful brethren who thought that the revealing of the ritual to profane eyes would destroy the order, and who hoped to save it by removing the traitor within the camp. Space here is not sufficient to retell the interesting, often exciting, and always varied story of the political campaigns which were predicated on, and took much of their ammunition from, the anti-Masonic excitement which followed the Morgan affair. It is not to be supposed that the abduction and alleged, never proved, murder of Morgan was the sole cause of this outburst, any more than was the assassination in 1914 the sole cause of the World War. Both were the triggers which set off guns, which, in turn, caused other explosions. Suffice it here that a wave of hysteria was seized upon by able politicians, fanned by demagogues, increased by the righteous indignation of good men and true, who saw not beneath the surface, helped onward by press and pulpit with the best of intentions but little understanding, until the whole East flamed with passion and Freemasons were spit upon in the streets. Lodges threw away their charters, and Freemasonry bowed its head to a storm as unjust and undeserved as all religious persecutions have always been. Like any other hysteria, this passed. Passions wore themselves away. A few sturdy and brave men stood staunchly by. A few grand lodges, with high courage and the strengths of the right, never ceased to proclaim their allegiance to the principles of the order. Little by little, Freemasonry raised its head. One by one, lodges took heart. Brother by brother, craftsmen returned to their altars. After a period following almost 20 years of more or less complete eclipse, the sun of Freemasonry shone again, and the world was treated to a spectacle that has been a heartening lesson to millions, and will be to counted millions yet to be born anew at the sacred altar of Freemasonry. The strange sight of an order many had thought dead, suffering from uncounted thousands of stabs to the heart, coming to life again to grow and thrive and attract to it then, as it had in the historic past, men of the highest character. It is for this that the craft of today can offer thanks to the great architect for the Morgan affair. Dreadful as it was to the men who lived through it, terrible in its consequences to the brethren who suffered it, it demonstrated again, and it may be hoped and believed once for all, that the underlying faith of Freemasonry, its ancient landmarks, its foundation upon deity and the great light, together are stronger than any evil, more lasting than any calumny, more enduring than any human passions. Forever and forever, so mote it be.
For more Masonic podcasts, videos, music, texts, and artwork, visit fromthequarries.com or subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook accounts by searching From the Quarries.
For a deep dive into the history, philosophy, and traditions of Freemasonry, subscribe to From the Quarries. You will find hundreds of lectures, presentations, shorts, and other Masonic works written by Freemasons, for Freemasons. Visit fromthequarries.com or YouTube at From the Quarries.